Right, after you, Dan.
Perfect. Well, thank you all so much for coming to join today's Friday lunchtime webinar with us at the Land App, where today we're going to be looking at preparing for the Sustainable Farm Incentive. Now, I'm delighted to say that we're joined by Tom Lewis, who's the Senior Policy Lead for Defra's SFI, and we'll hear a bit more from him later on. Just before we do, however, just the classic housekeeping before we get started. You're probably all very much used to it by now, but this is a webinar, so your camera is switched off and your microphone will remain muted throughout. However, that doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you. The Zoom functions are working as per usual, so any questions you have for either myself or our single panelists today, please feel free to put them in the Q&A section. Plus, as people already are, use the chat function for any other business. So if you want to have a conversation or make any comments or etc. But please do, if it is a question for the panel, please do try and use the Q&A function. The session today is going to be an hour, so hopefully by 2 p.m. we will have it wrapped up. However, we will, as per, just stay on for 10 minutes at the end if anyone wants to stay around and have a conversation. We'll be about. The session is being recorded, so we will add it to our YouTube channel, and Tom from Land App in the background will upload it probably on Tuesday next week as it's a bank holiday, and add some chapters, etc. as well. So if you want to come back and find a particular part, you should be able to do that nice and easily. As usual, we do have a couple of questions preloaded. So when you leave the Zoom, please, if you could suspend 30 seconds to answer them. They just help us with a bit of product development, but also will feed into any future webinars that we may be running. Bit of an agenda. So we've done the housekeeping under 5 minutes. That gives us a bit more time. So the first section is really going to be hearing from Tom Lewis from Defra, just around where we're at the moment with the Sustainable Farm Incentive, what any recent updates might have been, plus also talking a bit about obviously the SFI 22's out, but also some of the pilots that are running. And that is hopefully going to be a free-flowing conversation. But if there are any particular things that you want Tom to cover, like I said, please use the Q&A function. We're then going to spend about 20 minutes just demonstrating a step-by-step guide to anyone who wants to use the Land App for SFI. And I'll be showing how you can use our new SFI template to maximum efficiency to preparing your SFI application. And then going to just spend 5 minutes on a quick update from Ordnance Survey. We've just updated the way that we serve Ordnance Survey data, and it might be of use to some of you. And then finally, there is a bit of time at the end to answer any questions that might have arisen after that initial conversation. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and bring on our panelist, Tom. And I suppose the first thing I can do, Tom, is just ask you to introduce yourself to everyone. What's your position and how are you getting on in Defra?
Yeah, thanks, Dan, and hi everyone, and thanks to the Land App team for organising this and inviting me along. And I must say I'm looking forward to seeing the demo as well later on. I haven't seen that yet. So I'm Tom Lewis. I perhaps will have spoken to some of you before. I tend to do a few webinars and things like this. So I lead the development of the policy for the Sustainable Farming Incentive Scheme. I also headed that pilot, the SFI pilot that we launched last year. So if any of you are in the pilot, you might have heard me talk already. So that's what I do. I've been doing this for a few years. My background, I've worked across Defra, a variety of different schemes, and once upon a time was a farmer, certainly the son of a farmer. My brother runs the farm back in West Wales, so they're out of my jurisdiction, which is quite helpful. But yeah, so I work on the SFI scheme. It is a pretty exciting time for us. SFI, as you'll all be aware, is the first of our new post-cap schemes to be launched, to go live. And you know, we're finalising this at the moment. Most of you, I hope, will have seen the announcement we put out at the end of March that set out a lot more detail about the scheme. So yeah, really exciting time for us. Really looking forward to opening the scheme up and to getting some applicants into the scheme.
Great. Well, Tom, it's definitely the right person to have on this call, and hopefully all of us here are going to learn a lot about where Defra's head's currently at, with what's the expectations from landowners, but also what the expectation is for outcomes. But before we dive into a bit more of the details, could you just explain, just at a really high level, just in case anyone that's come on, what exactly is SFI? How does it fit in with ELMS? And how does it fit in with other schemes like countryside stewardship or basic payment?
Okay, yes. So Sustainable Farming Incentive, so SFI, is one of the 3 schemes that make up ELM. So the other 2 schemes, which are slightly behind us in terms of rollout, so local nature recovery and landscape recovery. Very briefly, local nature recovery is a bit more in the vein of countryside stewardship. So those of you that have got live CS agreements or have had CS agreements, or indeed previous agri-environment scheme agreements like HLS, LNR is a sort of successor to that, looking to improve how that scheme operates. But it's very much in that vein. Landscape recovery is something quite new. We're just going out at the moment to ask for expressions of interest to come and work with us on the landscape recovery scheme. Now, LR is the intention is it's going to be very specific, relatively small coverage of England. That's going to be the place where some of the really quite kind of environmentally kind of wild concepts like rewilding, planting forests, that sort of stuff. That's where that's going to come in. So landscape recovery is the 3rd and the most sort of focused and smallest of our schemes. SFI is the big scheme in terms of coverage. We expect all farmers in England to take part in the scheme. It'll be entirely voluntary, but it's the scheme that we want to aim at all farmers. It's aimed at making agriculture more sustainable. It's certainly not aimed at stopping people producing food. So the way in which we've designed the scheme, the standards so far, very much about supporting and enabling farmers to farm, as I say, a bit more environmentally sustainably, whilst not kind of cutting back on kind of food production. So that's kind of where we are in terms of the schemes. The ELM schemes themselves, these are the successors. So these are the post-CAP, post-EU schemes. These are all being developed under our own domestic legislation. So we're not following any of the old EU rules. These are all our kind of our own schemes. And as I say, SFI starts this year, and it'll be available to all farmers. All farmers who claim BPS at the moment will be eligible for SFI. There's no problem about being in both of those at all. Those farmers who have currently have countryside stewardship schemes, and there are some issues with kind of double funding between the CS and the SFI schemes that we've already set out really clearly about what land can't go in both. So yeah, I mean, I suppose what we're saying is to encourage people to have a look at schemes, look at standards, look at what's in the scheme, and have a think about applying.
Yeah, okay, well, that's really, really handy. And just to clarify then around eligibility, every farmer within England is eligible to apply, and is there a minimum size? Because I know BPS has obviously got a minimum size. Is there a minimum size for SFI as well?
So what we've decided to do this year, so ultimately we will kind of completely move away from anything to do with BPS and BPS and SFI, but for this year and probably next year, we're keeping eligibility rule the same. So if you're eligible for BPS, you're eligible for SFI. And as you say, Dan, there are eligibility rules around BPS, which we're taking into SFI at the start, but we're looking, as I say, in future years to move away from them. So as I say, at a summary, if your business currently claims BPS, you're eligible. If you're eligible and you choose to apply later on in a few months' time, when you apply, if you've got any kind of live CS agreements on your land, at the point of application, we'll block out anything that you're not eligible to apply on, if that makes sense. So it should be relatively simple as a farmer to log into the rural payment system, identify your land, see what land's eligible, and then take your application from there.
So that's an automatic. So if you've got a stewardship option that's kind of competing with your SFI application, if you apply for SFI, that will be open. Is there an element of the farmer choosing whether they want the SFI rather than the stewardship, or is it just automatically SFI gets the priority?
So at this stage, it'll be CS that has the priority because the CS is a live agreement. And again, hopefully this is relatively straightforward. If as a farmer you've signed up to do CS, which is as you all know, a 5-year agreement, you've got your legal agreement in place to deliver that. So if we were to pay you again to do something in SFI that you're already getting paid for in CS, that would count as double funding, which is in terms of Treasury rules, it's a kind of massive no-no. So when farmers apply for SFI at the point of application, any land that's not eligible, we will clearly show to the farmer. So you can make your mind up. You can decide whether to apply still this year, pardon me, or wait until the CS agreement ends at some future time. So, but as I say, the idea is to keep it as simple and straightforward as possible. So in terms of the land you apply on, it's really clear to you, to the farmer, what you can apply for on that.
Great, and yeah, that's good to hear. And could we just dive into a bit about what's within the SFI? So I know there's grassland standards, arable standards, moorland. Can you give us just an overarching view of what's currently available? I know the June application is coming round relatively quickly. Is that going to be open? All the standards going to be eligible in that, or is there just a particular corner of the standards? And just a bit more about what's expected.
Yeah, no, good question. So ultimately, sustainable farming incentive will have potentially 10, maybe a dozen different standards. That's the ultimate aim, and that'll be from sort of 2024 onwards. The way in which we've developed standards, pardon me, I'll eat my lunch too quickly. The way in which we've designed standards is we've got simple packages of actions that are related to what we call like an asset on the farm. So arable land is an asset, improved grassland is an asset. We've got packages of actions that farmers can choose to do on their land types. So this year, we're starting with 3 standards only. That's the arable and horticultural soil standards. That's an improved grassland soil standard, and it's a moorland standard. So those are the 3 standards we're starting with this year, really just the start of the process. We wanted to start in a way that we were confident we could get farmers into. We wanted to start with something meaningful for hopefully all farmers in England to get into the scheme, to be able to choose a standard that they want to deliver on their farm. So the standards, as I say, they're groupings of actions, which the farmer, if you apply to do, you would need to confirm you were going to deliver that action on your land for the duration of your agreement. So that's how we've kind of bunched them together. I can talk perhaps a bit later on, if you like, about some of the specifics, but we've published some information about what's in those standards. We've kept them as kind of simple and clear as we can. So we've set out what actions would need to be undertaken and when. As you say, in terms of the application deadlines and kind of headlines, one of the big changes with SFI, as opposed to any of the previous schemes people will have been involved with, is we are intending to have a rolling application window. So from the end of June, early July, and we haven't got the precise date yet. So it might be, as I say, it might be as late as early July, it might be as early as the sort of end of June. The applications system will open, and then farmers can choose when to submit their application. If you're really keen, you can do so right at the outset. We will turn your application into an agreement as quickly as we can. It might be a few days, might be a few weeks, depending on any kind of checks and things that have to take place. But the applications, essentially, there are no windows anymore. So farmers will be able to put an application in whenever they choose. We'll turn the application into agreement as quickly as we're able to. The agreement will start as soon as possible after that, and then payments will come out quarterly on the back of that. So end of June, early July is when the applications system will open. And we really hope that the first live agreements are out really quite soon after that.
Yeah, great. I was just going to say, no, it's exciting to hear that the application window has been spread out. I suppose the question is, do you hope that will reduce the administrative burden it has on, say, getting payments to farmers? Or, and kind of second to that, is there a guarantee by Defra on the timeline for payments for people going into SFI?
Yeah, so the first point is something we're really interested to look at about the admin overhead. There were 2 drivers for rolling applications. The most important one is about farmers. And depending on who you are, where you farm, what enterprises you do, there were busy times, there were quiet times. It's impossible to find a time that everyone has the time. And so we've heard that loud and clear from farmers, that some farmers would like to submit an application in the winter, some in spring, some in the summer. So this has been kind of put together very much to sort of see whether it works best for farmers. But it is really quite exciting in terms of our administrative overhead. Whatever you think about the Royal Payments Agency, they do a pretty amazing job getting through a lot of detail. If you have a fixed deadline, then that is a fixed deadline for all of their administrators to do all of the work by. So by removing that, it does allow us to spread the work out. So we are hoping and expecting that this is going to make it simpler and easier for us to pay on time, do all the bits that we need to do. In terms of the guarantee point, the expectation is that as soon as your agreement goes live, you'll be paid. Your first quarterly payment will come within the first, the end of that 3 months. So if your agreement goes live on the 1st of, this is where I do bad maths, you realise I can't count. If your agreement goes live on the 1st of January 2023, you obviously start work to deliver your agreement. Your payments would be with you within that first sort of 3 months. So by the 1st of April, I think that's right, by the end of March, you would have had your first payment. Those payments then roll out quarterly. That's our expectation. Sometimes things go wrong. Sometimes there are issues with SSI consents, or I don't know, historic environment issues or whatever, that sometimes slow the process up. But very much the intention, where we want to start from, is get into this really good habit of paying on time, quarterly, regularly, so that all the farmers, all of you guys out there, you can budget. When the money's going to hit your bank account. So that's our intention.
Yeah, and we fully appreciate the amount of work that goes into what the RPA does, and obviously wish them luck in making sure the administration goes well. Just as a reiteration, I'm sure people are thinking it is like, we obviously want as many people, if not 100%, to get involved in SFI. And I know one of the major blockers might be the concern around payment speeds. So I think if RPA really smashes it out of the park, I think the uptake will be greater than if there is some delays, because people are obviously more and more on the tighter margin. And I think anything that the administration can do to make sure those payments happen is going to improve the uptake. I just wanted to dive in a bit around language, because you've mentioned standards and you've mentioned actions. So just so it's clear in my head, and obviously please correct me, as you've said arable, you've got low input and you've got improved grassland. Each of those have a set of standards associated with them, and those standards are tiered. So you can either go in at the introductory level to the basic minimum to get a payment to improve the habitat type or improve the quality of that feature. And then as you go up those tiers, within those standards, there's different levels, correct? And then there's actions as well. So there's actions that are found within the standards. So you need to do soil sampling, for example, but also there's supplementary actions on top of each of those. Can you just dive in and just define standards, actions, just so everyone's clear on that point?
Yeah, I absolutely can do. So, so the first point, which I think is important, just before we get into the detail, when we launched our Sustainable Farming Incentive pilot last year, we launched with 8 standards. They were broad. They had all kinds of actions and activities within them. We've learned a lot about those already. So just to make sure it's really clear, and I appreciate it can be a little bit complex sometimes, but we launched our pilot last year with 8 standards. We've got 3 standards that we're launching for real for everybody for this year, which we've set out really clearly. So there is a difference between what we did for the pilot last year and what we're rolling out to everybody this year. So, as I say, as you outlined, the standards, the idea is that there are a fixed number of actions that we want the farmer to undertake within those standards. So there is the menu is kind of fixed, really. The only choice the farmer has, if they choose the standard, is to go for the introductory or the intermediate level. So the idea is you have different ambition levels, so a farmer can apply whichever standard, whichever type of action works best for them on their farm, to the different areas of land on their farm. So, as I say, we've grouped those actions under the standards. We've kept them as sort of simple as we can. So for the arable and horticultural soil standard, for example, the actions are, and I won't go through these all in detail because, as I say, I think it's better to have a read of the actual standard. But the kind of actions are, we've got one which is about having no bare ground over winter, for example. So we set a percentage target. If you join the arable and horticultural standard, we want you to have no more than 70% bare ground over the winter. Now, you can achieve that by planting your crops in the autumn. Achieve that by sowing green cover crops. You can achieve that in a number of different ways. So we've left the choice pretty much kind of open about how you might achieve some of the actions within the standard. So we've got some things out there about minimizing winter cover. As you said earlier, one of the really important things we want farmers to undertake if they join the SFI, join the Albion Horticultural Soil Standard in particular, is to understand your current soil organic matter status. And so we want you to go out and undertake some soil testing. We want you then to develop a soil plan on back of that. And this is very much about helping you build your, or helping you confirm your understanding, I suppose, the actual facts and status of your soil. So you can understand where and how to add additional organic matter. And the addition of organic matter is another one of the actions that exists within the standard. So, and again, we aren't specifying precisely how you do it. It doesn't have to be muck, doesn't have to be chopped straw. It can be a variety of different mechanisms that work best for you as the farmer. So we've identified and set these actions out. We want to give you the choice, the opportunity about how you deliver the actions. So all we really need to see is that you're going to do it. And then once a year, we'll ask you to declare that you've done everything that you're supposed to do, that you've signed up to do. And that should be that. So we're trying to move to a simpler way of delivering the scheme and measuring and monitoring the scheme. But as I say, what we can do is if people haven't seen them, we can share the detail of the standards. We've really worked to try and keep them pretty simple. And perhaps if there are questions coming through, I can come back to this at the end of the call. If people would like a sort of detailed run through, we can perhaps, put them up on the screen. But as I said, the idea is these are actions that all farmers can undertake, and farmers can choose precisely how they go about delivering them.
Yeah, okay, that's great. And actually, there's lots of questions coming through. What we will do is we'll go to most of those in the last final 15 minutes of the call. Just the final question I've really got in this conversation before we move to a bit of a mapping demo is just around, what does the application look like? You've mentioned the form. Is it all just a spreadsheet? Is there any element of mapping? We're from a mapping background here, and there's people on the call that are obviously mapping advocates as well. And then secondly, just around what evidence is required from farmers to retain through the duration of the SFI. Are we talking photo evidence, proof of action, and is there kind of in parallel to that inspections as in there is in stewardship?
Yeah, okay. So the application system is the final, as I think I said on this call. I've had a few calls today. There is some final testing that's going on at the moment around that. So the RPA have very much worked on and improved the system we used in the pilot, which in turn was based on systems that are used for BPS and CS. So within SFI application process, farmers will see the data that you've already submitted for things like BPS. So we will display the data back to farmers. We'll display the land that you own, we think you own, or you rent or whatever. We'll display that back to you, and we'll make an assessment based on the land cover about what of those parcels is eligible for the different standards within SFI. So if it's land that we think's arable, we'll display back to you all the land that's eligible for the arable standard. If it's land that's grassland, and so on. So the intention is very much that as a farmer, when you log in, we will display back to you the land we think you own, which you can obviously look at, and if it's wrong, there are processes to go and correct that. And then we're going to present you with the land that we think is eligible for the different standards. Again, farmers can choose. You don't have to put all your land in. Whether it's the actions you don't want to do on all your land, or whether it's for whatever reason, it's entirely down to farmers to choose the land parcels to put in against the different standards. So you can go through that process, click select your parcels and do that. And then essentially that's the basis of the application process. You would then submit that as an application. If we think, as we said earlier, if we think there's any problem with things like CS, for example, if we think that SSI consent is required, or habitat regs assessments are required, any of those regulatory issues which we can't kind of do away with, if we think there are needs for you to go and check, we'll flag that during the application process. So the idea is it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And yeah, I mean, as I say, we're testing that at the moment, and our expectation, what's more than expectation, because I've seen some demos and the system does look good, is that this is really going to feel quite differently quite different to things that have been done in the past. We will set out really clearly what evidence farmers need to keep. We may want, for example, if we are paying for a soil management plan, we may want you to submit that at some point. How you develop the soil management plan, we really want to keep it down to you. We know some farmers have got fantastic levels of planning that they undertake on their farm. Others, it's far more kind of paper and pen sort of stuff. Whatever works for the farmer is absolutely fine. We may want to see that. We can't move away from doing some inspections, and I don't think anyone wants us to. I think we have to spend public money wisely. We have to still do some checks. We're just working with the RPA at the moment about precisely how we do that. The key to all of this, and the key goes back to the standards that we mentioned earlier. We've really tried to keep the standards really simple. So this means it should be simple for all of you to choose which ones to do, hopefully simple to deliver and achieve. And then for us, for our kind of administrators, really, really simple to see whether you've done it or not. So the more prescriptive, the more complex the things we ask you to do, firstly drive you up the wall, and we know that. But also it's really hard then to evidence. If we want 1% of this or a few meters of that, you've got to get your pen out, you've got to get your measuring tapes out to measure those things. So we're trying to move away within SFI from that level of kind of over complexity. So that's kind of where we're at. And I appreciate I've talked to a lot of stuff there, but that's the kind of intention of where we're going with this.
Yeah, not a problem at all. And I think people are here to listen. It's being recorded, so if anyone wants to watch any of those back, please do. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to spend 15 minutes demonstrating the SFI template. So thank you so much for your time then, Tom. We'll come back.